All right, so it's 5 after, and we'll keep letting people in, but we want to be mindful of your time. Thank you so much for joining us this afternoon. We're really excited to present this to you. My name is Megan Temple. I'm the Senior Communication Specialist at ESD 113, and I will be your moderator today. We have 4 presenters for you today that we're really excited about. Kristen Jodan is our Senior Director of Communications for ESD 113. And then we have 3 of our partners from Qualtrics, Byron Adams, Samantha Murray, and Brett Callahan. So they will be speaking at the back half of our presentation, but we're really excited that they have partnered with us for today. A little bit about Kristen Jodan. Kristen started at Capital Region ESD 113 in 2016. She was hired to create a brand new communications department at the ESD to help tell the ESD story and provide communication services for districts in our region. She's grown that department to a team of 4, of which I'm included, and plans to continue to expand as soon as she can, acknowledging the difficulty of onboarding new employees during COVID-19 telework environment. Kristen joined the ESD after working for 4 years and in state-level school communications at OSPI. Byron Adams is a K-12 specialist at Qualtrics. Prior to joining Qualtrics, he directed school turnaround, climate and culture, and professional development in Boston and Chicago school districts. Brett Callahan is a K-12 account executive with Qualtrics, working with the California, Oregon, and Washington K-12 market. He can be found chasing his kids around when he's not working with his clients at Qualtrics. And Samantha Murray is an XM scientist with over 15 years of K-12 experience in private, charter, and public school settings. A former middle school teacher, research evaluator, and Baltimore County Public Schools District Administrator, Samantha advises Qualtrics clients on how to develop XM programs to drive continuous system and school improvement. So welcome to all of our presenters. To give you an idea of what you can expect today, you're going to be receiving an introduction to communication strategy, tools and tips that you can start using today. You're going to have time for team planning for communications. We're going to be looking at the Reopening Washington Schools 2020 District Planning Guide Communications Overview, community and staff engagement and your needs assessment, another breakout for team planning, and wrap up, and plenty of time for questions and answers. If you have questions, feel free to drop them in the chat. I will be monitoring the chat. And just another reminder, we still have people coming in. This is great. If you would please rename yourself for our breakout rooms, that would be greatly, greatly appreciated. And myself and our facilitator, Shiloh Koslerich, are working behind the scenes to help in any way that we can. So feel free to message us in the chat and we'll do what we can. And I think without further ado, I'll turn it over to Kristen.
Okay, good morning. Is everyone able to see my screen? Looking good? Should say breathe. So as we get started, I wanted to welcome you here today, and I also wanted to take a moment to acknowledge the situation that we're in. This has been a weird time for many of us, and we've had to make massive adjustments at work and at home. And educators have never stopped working. For us, there's been no break. And so now you're here, gearing up for another school year amidst this incredible time of uncertainty. So I just wanted to take a moment to thank you and express my gratitude for your work and dedication to the students in our region. I myself actually have 2 of those students, although one is in the class of 2020, and she would be the first one to let you know that she has just finished all of her coursework. So as we move forward in the planning, I just want to remind everybody that we need to slow down for a minute and take a breath. Nobody does their best work when we're in panic mode. And so the slide is actually as much for me as it is for you, because we're all trying new things, and definitely this Zoom type of format is new for me. I can tell you that I sit in on plenty of Zoom meetings, but I've never actually facilitated such a large group of people. And so normally I'm used to having conversations where I ask questions and then folks answer. So I'm going to try to do that my best today in Zoom, trying to engage you through the chat window. So bear with me because it is something new for me. Okay. So the important thing is that we all keep trying. We're going to try new things. We're going to make mistakes, and that's okay because we're all in this together. So communication strategy. Communications, if you do it well, it takes a lot of effort. It's not easy. And I often say that communications is a practice and that you'll never achieve perfection. It's something that you keep moving toward all the time. So as we get started here, I just wanted to kick off our session together with a poll question. Megan, are you ready to go with the polling? All right. How often do you build and stick to, because that's an important element, right, to a communications plan when you have important news to share? And so we're just going to take about 30 seconds here to let those answers come in. All right, they're still coming in. Got 10 seconds left. All righty, time's up. Let's review these results here. So folks are doing a pretty good job. If you have answered that you usually build a communications plan and you usually stick to it, I would love to know who on your team is responsible for building and implementing your district's communications plan. I don't want to know names necessarily. I'm interested more in job roles. So I'm just curious to know who on your team is responsible for that work. All right, I'm seeing superintendent, building principal, vice principal. Yep. All right, so Yelm has a communications director, communications specialist. Yep. Looks like Voiceford has a team of people who do that work. And Elma has a community liaison. That's an interesting idea. Okay, cool. Thanks for your feedback. All right, so what is the point of doing all this planning? I mean, why would we take time to think about who we're needing to communicate with and then be very intentional about how we're doing it? And the point of it is you're trying to build trust and credibility. People are less likely to comprehend information when they're under stress, and they're more likely to trust organizations that demonstrate empathy and honesty especially during a crisis and when anxiety levels are higher than normal. Again, I know I don't do my best work when I'm in a panic. So anytime you're able to just take a breath, take a moment, organize your thoughts into some sort of a plan, I automatically feel better if I know that there's a plan in place that I can refer to. It's not enough just to make a plan, then you have to follow through on it too. Okay. So getting started. Whenever you're communicating with people, you always want to lead with empathy and what connects people as human beings. You're going to want to begin with a statement of values or purpose or priorities or intent. You're going to set the stage to tell people what to expect to hear when you're sending out a message, either written or verbal. Do this especially when anxiety is high, but it's generally a pretty good practice to follow. It helps to focus a distracted audience and center their attention on what you're trying to say if you take just a moment to collect your thoughts and put them out in front of people. And speaking of distracted, my friend Andrew Ayers, who works with me here at the ESD, is fond of saying that we need to communicate 7 times, 7 ways. And I have adopted that saying, although I do give him credit, but this totally aligns with best communications practice. So I tell people all the time that you can't just assume that people are going to see the message the first or second or sometimes even third or fourth time that they see it or hear it. Why would this be? Why are people not able to focus the first time around? I hear people all the time saying, well, they should know because we sent an email and we told them all about it. But there are lots of reasons people could be distracted. I know, speaking for myself, I tend to open my emails on my mobile phone when I'm doing other things. I may not be in a position to take action at the moment that I'm reading the email, and I probably mean to get back to the email when I am less busy, but then I'll forget. And remembering, so you'll also want to remember that when you're writing your message, it's very important to you, and you're probably at work focused on that message. And the people who are receiving your message are probably at home surrounded by other distractions. And so they're much less likely to focus on your important message than you think they should be doing. So pro tip number 1, you're going to want to keep it simple. I talk to people all the time who tell me how educated their audiences are and that they don't need to, they like to use the phrase dumb down their message for a smart audience. But I'm going to argue back and say that you're going to want to aim for a reading level of grade 8 for every audience that you are communicating with. And I am serious about that. I know that your audience is smart and can read at a higher level than grade 8. Typically. And I know that it's really hard to get your message to be, to register at a grade 8. Often when we are talking about important things, we are using a tone to try to convey the importance of the message. And sometimes that language can get kind of out of control and get, a little more complicated than it needs to be. But really the goal of your message, you're trying to get somebody to know, do, think, or feel something. So the easier you can make it for them, the better it's going to be, and the more likely that they're actually going to take action as a result of reading your message. So I would always say, shoot for grade 8 if you can. That's the goal. I like to use the Hemingway app. It's free and it's available online. I use this all the time, especially when I'm doing bulk messaging. And here's what it looks like. So if you are, if you're at Hemingway app, or what did I say? Is it HemingwayApp.com. They have a window here that you can just copy and paste your writing in. And what I like best about Hemingway app is it doesn't just give you a grade level analysis of your writing. It actually goes through and it talks about ways that you can make your writing better and tighter and goals that you should have for your writing. It's very helpful. It highlights stuff for you so that you can actually, without too much work, really hone in on what you're looking for. Okay, so wrong direction. Okay, so message length. Keep it short. Don't overwhelm your audience with too much information all at once. I would suggest maybe communicating more often with shorter messages works better because it actually helps people find specific messages in their inboxes later. So if you can chunk your messaging into small bite-sized pieces, you pick one topic to talk about, name it in your subject line. It focuses people's attention, and then when they need to refer back to it later, it's really easy just to do a simple subject line search, and when people are skimming, it's an easy way to find what topic they're looking for. Message structure. Like I mentioned earlier, you're going to want to lead with empathy, especially when emotions are high. But what comes next? In a high stress environment, it's easy for our minds to just sort of expand and kind of be all over the place. This is a formula that I have determined really makes a lot of sense, and it helps to focus your thinking. You're going to want to tell people what you know now. Then you're going to want to tell people what you don't know yet. And then you're going to want to say how you're going to find out more and when to expect an update. Nobody expects you to have all the answers all the time. It would be awesome, and everybody wishes that were the case, but we know we're all human and we're all doing our best. So if you lay out those 4 things every time, it gives it's a structure people can depend on. They sort of know the expectation, and it sets you up for a consistent message. So if you tell people that you're committing to find out more, and then how you're going to do it, and then when the next update will come, make sure that you stick to that commitment. And don't worry if you repeat your content. Remember, your audience is distracted, so it never hurts to have that same information given to them more than once. Now, I don't mean to copy and paste. You're going to want to find a way to sort of restate what you've already stated before. That's totally fine. People actually do need to see the information a few times before the information sets in. If people don't hear from you in the time that they expect to hear from you, or don't read your communications, or they've forgotten that you emailed them that one time, they're likely to tell stories to themselves about why that information is missing, or why they think it might be missing. And those stories usually aren't flattering. And even if you don't have that much news report, that's okay. If you told them you're going to follow up with them, make sure that you do it. Stay connected. Look for ways to stay connected. Establish consistent expectations and stay consistent. Okay, so pro tip. This is my favorite tip of the morning, actually. People don't expect you to be perfect. They expect you to care. So I want you to really think about that, because every time you communicate, you have an opportunity to show care for the people that you're talking to. The more you show you care, the more likely they are to trust what you're saying. You're going to want to show empathy and to be honest and open, and not try to act like you're hiding anything. It's an investment in your relationship, so keep making those deposits, because you will need those deposits in the trusting relationship to smooth things over when things start to go badly. I'm not saying that they will go badly often, but they will at some point not be ideal. And so the more trust that you've built up over time, the more forgiving your audience will be when you need to deal with those hard situations. So now seems like to be a good time for our first break. So I wanted to check in and see if anybody had any questions so far. No questions are coming in. I'm just going to give you a couple more. Let's see, a copy of the PowerPoint. Yes, I'm going to be having a copy of this particular PowerPoint, and all the materials that I'm going to be referencing in today's PowerPoint are going to be available in a Google Drive. I have a link in my presentation a little bit farther in, so don't worry. All of our materials will be posted, and we will make them available, and they're also ADA accessible, so anyone should be able to access that information. Is the ESD going to provide sample communications as we get into the summer? Actually, yes. A little bit later in the presentation, I'm going to talk about ways that we can work together, the ESD, but then also districts to district, sharing information, because I definitely don't want us to have to reinvent the wheel over and over again. I think that's the real power of connecting people. And so you're going to save a lot of time and energy if we can learn from each other and use each other as resources. So definitely, I am going to be setting up a system of support to encourage that to happen. Let's see.
Kristen, we had a question come in of, when you say short, what does that mean?
Oh, okay. That's a really excellent question. I think when I say short, I mean probably, if you can, focused on like one topic at a time. Now, that doesn't always make sense. If you're sending out a newsletter and you've got like 5 or 6 different topics in it, that's totally fine. Your audience is used to receiving email newsletters or whatever. So that they're familiar with that format. But if you are communicating about something else, a less regular form of communication, like a newsletter, it has a consistent, maybe you do that monthly. But if you have news to share and you might have 3 or 4 different topics that you need to tell your community about, consider breaking it into 3 or 4 different emails. It might not make sense every time, but when it does, try to limit the amount of subjects in an email and send a higher quantity of emails, just so that people can chunk the information and not be overwhelmed with so much at the same time. Often what I find is when people have a lot of information to share, the first thing they do when they write the email is they apologize for the length of the email. And I want to just say that apology is actually extending the amount of time that I'm going to have to read this email. So let's be a little bit more strategic about the plan for releasing that information. And if you can, chunk it into smaller pieces so I'm not overwhelmed all at the same time. I think it feels like it's a little bit better planned out. Again, you don't want to barrage people with emails and just look haphazard about it, but if it can feel well planned out and strategic, I think it's going to be better. As far as the length goes, you know, I guess it just depends on how many sentences it takes to get to to let you finish your thought. I mean, there are theories out there that say you should limit your emails to 5 sentences. I don't know that that's appropriate every time, but it is kind of a goal that you could strive to hit, knowing that that might be the ideal, but it might not make sense in every scenario.
And we have another question of, how much time should there be before the follow-up, and what is appropriate for that timeline?
I guess I would want to know what you mean. So are you talking about if we have to send another email? You know what? I would probably set up expectations in the email. Say we will be, over the next week, we will be sending, 3 emails about A, B, and C. And then do it that way so that people aren't surprised by receiving multiple emails maybe. And it feels like there's a plan to it. And you might even, if you know you're going to need to send a series of emails, just set it up right at the beginning. Over the next week, we're going to be talking to you about topics A, B, and C. Today, we're focused on A, and then your 5 sentences. And then we look forward to sharing with you about B tomorrow. And then on the second day, you would say, yesterday we told you about A, today we're focused on B, and then spell out that information and say, I look forward to talking to you tomorrow about C. That's an idea. I'm not saying it needs to be like that every time. It's just the more you can chunk information into small bite-sized pieces, the better, because I've seen a study recently that people can see as many as 490,000 words in a day, and they're not going to read all of those 490,000 words for sure, but that's how many they're exposed to. So you want your words to be the ones that they slow down and spend time with. So I'm just looking for every strategy that I can to make sure that if I have something important to say, I want you to know how important it is, and I want you to spend time reading my words and not competing with the other 450,000. Okay, anything else? feel free to, we're just gonna take like 5 minutes here. So if you need to get up and stretch or grab a cup of coffee or whatever, we will be reconvening in 5. Okay, we have about 1 more minute left on our break, just to give you a heads up. Okay, great. I hope you were refreshed. Our discussion so far, we've been talking about why messaging is so important. You want to set the tone to develop trust over time. Remember, people don't expect you to be perfect, but they do expect you to care. And that's actually a pretty comforting thought because we're all sort of making this up as we go. And I think a lot of people can relate to that. So now we're going to move into a communications plan structure. And you've done a lot of listening so far, and I do appreciate your participation in the poll and asking questions in the chat box. But this is actually where you're going to start working with your team to develop a plan that you are going to use through the summer and into the fall. We have a significant amount of planning to do. And so I really wanted you to be able to take this time today. I'm going to give you a tool that you can use. Actually, it's and during the planning phase, I have two different tools for you to use. One is a communications plan that gives you an overall structure. And the other one is a tactics tracker that once you get into deciding what you're going to do and who's going to do it and when, you can track that activity over time just to make sure that there's some accountability to make sure that you're getting that work done. So when I get started on a communications plan, I have a communications plan structure with 4 parts. I do research, planning, implementation, and evaluation. And what I found over time is that most people want to dive straight into the implementation phase because that's the fun part where people start doing videos and creating brochures and coming out with postcards. And that's the graphic design part. That's the colorful part that people get really excited about doing. That's the social media. It's the action. People don't want to spend a lot of time with the planning part because that's not as much fun. So I would argue that you would like to spend as much time on the research and the evaluation portions of your plan as the stuff in the middle, because that's how you're going to actually know what you're doing and be able to tell if you've actually been successful. You need to spend time at the beginning so that you know what you want to get at the end. And if you spend time at the end trying to understand where you've been, and you'll know if you've been successful, if you have to go back and keep working on some stuff if you haven't quite gotten where you want to be. So phase 1 is the research. Here's where you tell the background story of why you're creating the plan in the first place. In this case, we're mostly going to be talking about COVID-19 at this point. So you're going to want to write down how COVID-19 has affected your district. And at this point, those memories are super fresh. You might not feel like you need to write them down, but I would say it's not a bad idea just to get all of that information out on paper or on screen or whatever, so that you can refer back to it. Your memory will fade over time, and it's just best practice to go ahead and put it in place so that you don't forget later. You're going to want to answer questions like, what day did you move to continuous learning from a distance? What percentage of your families have access and don't have access to the technology that they need? How have you been ensuring students have access to meals? What other questions can you ask that help you tell the story? These questions might vary from district to district. If you can think of other questions that you think folks should be asking when we break into teams, feel free to put them into the chat box so we can all benefit from your ideas that you have. This is a good spot for statistics so that you know where we're starting and you know how much you're going to need to improve over time. So when you put together your SMART goals, you have a starting point and you know where you want to end up at the end. And when I do research, I also like to do a SWOT analysis where we talk about strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And this is really just your chance to get it all out there, because whether or not you want to admit whatever you have to admit, it's better to plan for any shortcomings that you have in the beginning, and you might actually be able to take care of it through the course of the planning. If you're able to predict things that are going to be maybe kind of difficult for you, you can head them off and maybe they won't turn into as big of a deal as you were afraid they might at the beginning. Okay, and so when we move into phase 2, which is the planning phase, you're going to come up with a set of goals. Hopefully not too many, because if you have too many, it's really hard to focus. You want your goals to be SMART, and of course, SMART stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-bound. You're going to identify your audiences, like who needs to know this information. Likely, you're going to have a lot of audiences that you're trying to reach with this information, because schools being open or schools being closed or new rules being implemented at the school level, that affects hundreds of people. It affects not only your staff and your students and your families, but it starts to affect the people in the community. People who run after school daycare, people who might need to be available for tutoring. Like, I don't know necessarily what goes on in your community. This is something that you're going to want to think really hard when you're breaking out into your breakout sessions today, to really be exhaustive about that audience list, and don't put any limitations on it, and be specific. So you might consider breaking your staff audience into, we have district staff, we have elementary staff, we have high school staff. I mean, maybe all these different staffs need to have slightly different information. And you would be choosing key messages according to the different audiences that you're trying to reach. You're going to identify spokespeople, and this is pretty important. For example, do you have a protocol in place now if a reporter calls your school district? Who would be authorized to give an interview? Sometimes reporters like to work around a communication staff person and find somebody in an organization that they feel like would be super helpful, and that person may or may not be authorized to speak to a reporter, but that person might not know, and they're just trying to be helpful, and it's probably not the best way to approach media relations. You're going to want to have a plan, and a situation like a school's closing, situations like that are just a really great opportunity for reporters to call. They're going to want to know more information, because it's kind of a really interesting topic that the people are going to want to talk about. So you're going to develop a list of spokespeople who are authorized to speak about different topics. So so the list for media relations is going to be different and probably a lot shorter than the list of people who can handle parent calls. So those are going to be slightly different messages. There's the people who are authorized to respond are going to be different. And so you need to have a plan for when you're contacted by different groups coming from the outside. What is your plan for having, people authorized to speak to them? It's always better to know, so there aren't any questions and panic when those calls come in. Let's see, you're going to want to develop your key messages, which are a set of talking points that folks should feel comfortable drawing from no matter what situation they're in. As you begin to finalize the big decisions, go ahead and just keep adding them to your list of key messages so that people can stay informed as new decisions become available. Bearing in mind that different audiences are going to need different key messages. I actually have included the set of talking points from OSPI in the Google Drive that I've started. That includes the materials from this session, and I am going to post a link in the chat box right before we go to the breakout session, so that you have access to the tools that I'm talking about now, as well as the talking points from OSPI. So you will have access to that. Okay, phase 3 is implementation, and this is my favorite part. This is everybody's favorite part. You want to make sure that you start with a plan so you know which tools you're going to predict are going to give you the results that you want. I have a question for you. Everybody sort of has their favorite tools that they like to use, but I would kind of want to make sure that those tools are effective. And do you already know what methods each of your audience prefers? And then how do you know what works? So when you're developing your list of audiences, You're going to want to also state all the communications tools you have at your disposal that you're currently using, and make sure that you have alignment between your audience and your tools. And especially now, I think there's an opportunity to increase the audience list. And so that might expose gaps that you have between audience and tool. So the two audiences that come to my mind when I'm thinking about this specific COVID-19 situation would be community partners. We need to make sure that the community is connected to the decision we make. Actually, that's not the group I meant to say. I meant to say local health districts. So that is going to become a new audience for you. Maybe you communicate with them from time to time, but I think especially during COVID-19, you're going to want to make sure that you have a consistent method of communication with your local health department, so that you are aligned on your messaging and that there are no surprises for either one of you moving forward. The other audience that I would really encourage you to include in your plan is other districts from at least from your county, if not across the region. I want us to work as a team to be connected with each other so that, again, there aren't any surprises. If the school decides to close or open or do something that is going to affect their district, it's also going to have an effect on the area around them. Not every teacher who works in a district lives in that district. They might live in a neighboring district. So whatever decisions your district is making is going to affect people all around the region. So if you could include the neighboring districts in your communications plan and make sure you have a tool to connect that communication with that audience, I think that's going to do it's going to be a good relationship builder for you and your neighboring districts. I think that we don't want surprises is basically my message here. Match your tools with your audience to avoid that situation, and that leaves the other districts scrambling. And in phase 4, we're all talking about evaluation. What key measures are you going to use to decide if you've met your goals or not met your goals? And what I typically do when I'm working through a communications plan is I don't wait until the very end to look at all of my evaluation results, because sometimes I might be ready to move on to my next project. I sort of dip into evaluation and monitor my metrics as they come in, because I need room to be able to maneuver and be able to adjust my plan as time moves forward. When you set your plan out at the beginning, it's a plan. It's your best guess. It's using your best thinking at the time. Don't be afraid to change it mid-cycle. Like if you are way off of your goals that you were hoping to achieve at the end, don't be afraid to try new things. If you're not tracking the metrics, you're not going to know if it's working or not. You're not going to know if you need to change course. I would suggest that you check in with those measures as often as seems appropriate, and then make those little adjustments as we move through. Okay. This brings me to poll question number 2. Megan, can you launch that poll for us? Great. How often do you use data like email open rates or click-through rates to track communications efforts? Okay, I have our timer going. We have about 20 seconds left. Those answers are coming in. Okay, and then let's share the results. Okay, so 6 of you say you do that all the time. That's awesome. And it looks like this is an opportunity for some people to learn about some tools and to maybe incorporate it into your practice, or at least learn about it and think about doing it. You could start slowly. I know we have, you know, it's one of those habits that you get into, and once you start doing it, you crave the information the next time around. So I think it's habit forming. I do have a follow-up question to that. If you're those districts that all the time or usually check their statistics, I would be curious to know what tools you use. If you could enter that into the chat box, that'd be really helpful. Okay. Homeroom and Canvas. Great. I see somebody's mentioning Facebook analytics. Yeah, Twitter actually has some too. Google Analytics, awesome. Whatever works for you and whatever data you're looking for that you find helpful, I would just encourage you to do more of that. If you have a system that integrates with a specific data set, that's totally fine. Here at the ESD, we actually use a system called MailPoet to track open rates and click-through rates of all of our bulk emails, but there are a lot of products out there. Our MailPoet actually integrates into our website, so we can pull stories and stuff from our website and share it with people directly through email. So we found that that system works for us, and it's really fun to go through, and well, fun, but also sometimes it can be a little disappointing because I feel like my message is so important. I feel like everyone should read it, but that's not the feedback I get most of the time. So I'm always trying new things to figure out ways to entice people to open my messages. So it's a little game I play with myself every single time. So let's see. So by using this information, sometimes I can actually follow up with the same email to folks who didn't appear to see my email the first time, because I can actually tell who opens the email and who has not opened it. So that's kind of, you know, it can be helpful. If in case you missed it, here's an opportunity to do it again. We also track viewer engagement with tools that are built into Facebook and Twitter. Again, this is an area of growth for our team. And so it's one of those areas that you're like, you know, it's really important to do, and it would be so much better if we did it. I think this is an opportunity to just admit, you know, we could do a better job too. So we're in there with you. The point is, you just need to do it. It's one way to find out if your messages are getting through, and it's also a good way to find out what kind of messages your audience wants to hear. They don't always get the choice. Sometimes you have to share information that's less interesting, and they still need to know it. But if you can figure out what engages your audience the most and do more of that, they're more likely to open those necessary messages as well. It's also a way to help to focus your energy. So if you find that folks are loving your videos and they're sharing them on their own pages, by all means, you just need to keep doing videos. But if you're finding that your videos aren't getting much attention, you may decide that you want to spend that time that you're using creating videos, you might want to use it someplace else that gets better traction. So by following the statistics and staying engaged with the data, you're able to make better choices for your time and resources. So now we have come to our breakout, our first breakout. And so I will just say that ideally, and it sounds like a lot of you do the communications plan. So you have spent time developing your voice and your brand. And it sounds like a lot of you have a routine down. And if you don't, that is okay too. It's never too late to start. One of the things that I have been saying to myself over and over again, especially in these past 3 months, is don't wait to be perfect, just start doing something. That's sort of comforting to me, because I know that every time I start a project, I want it to be the best project ever. but I can't let that fear of failure prevent me from getting started, because doing something is going to always be better than doing nothing. So we're going to spend a significant amount of time today working with each other on a communications plan. And so let me just share with you here. I'm going to post a link to where you can find the templates here in the chat box. Let's see. Okay. So this is where you're going to find all the materials from today, including today's PowerPoint. That's also in there. You will see, let's see, for this particular breakout session, you're going to want to do the communications plan template. I would also say you're going to want to look at the tactical tracker as well. You might not get to the tactical tracker because filling out the communications plan honestly takes kind of a long time. Just full disclosure, every time I start one of these, it takes me probably 2 hours to really feel like I have done the work in order to create a communications plan that's actually usable. I ask a lot of questions when I get started, and some basic questions. I just really feel like we need to all remember what it's like not to know stuff. And so if I can come in and ask those really basic questions, that's probably where your audience is going to be starting too. So don't be afraid to ask the dumb questions. I tell people all the time, that's my job. So, so spend time going through the communications plan. If you are a district that has a communication staff, or you use communications planning all the time, you might have your own system for doing this. I have my own system for doing it. I would be curious to have you compare the two and just find out if there are some things that you like about your own system, or some things that you can learn from mine, and see if there's, you know, just compare and contrast and see if there's elements of both that you can sort of combine into the super plan. And then, so yeah, like the template really should walk you through all the steps that you need. And it asks questions in there to just really get you to think. So does anybody have any questions before we head out? We're going to be heading out for like 30 minutes. So there's plenty of time to like get that conversation started, but don't feel like you have to finish it today. This is just to launch you. I'm happy to answer any questions. I can pop around into breakout rooms if you want me to. I'll be in this general session if you ever want to come back and ask a question or whatever. How are we feeling about that? Is that an okay plan? Anybody? Are we good? We're going to do district teams because I really want you to be able to talk with the people in your district and start to feel like you have you've had some brainstorming time together to get your plan going. Okay. Not seeing any questions come in through the chat. So I think we're good. Do we want to start the breakout, Shiloh? Are we ready to go?
We're all set. We'll see you guys in a little bit.
Okay, half an hour. Or I'll be here if you need me.
Hi, Kristen.
Okay, it looks like we're back. Welcome back, everybody. So while we were in our breakout sessions, I asked you to be thinking about what went well. I'm sure there were some things that went really well for you this past spring that you want to continue, and some things that maybe didn't go so well that you might want to improve. And so this was your opportunity to talk to your team about that and to start going through the plan and filling it out. If you could just pick somebody, I mean, hopefully you did already, pick somebody from your group to share a quick summary in the chat box, that would be awesome. And then we can all sort of keep an eye on what everybody was talking about. All right, keep those comments coming in. I'm gonna keep moving. We have a presenter who is joining us here today who has a hard stop at 2:55. So I wanna make sure we have time to hear her whole presentation. So as we are moving into the new guidance that was released by OSPI just a few days ago, the Reopening Washington Schools 2020 District Planning Guide. It's been interesting. I'm going to stick a link here in the chat box just so you have the link if you want to open it up and follow along. It's been interesting talking to several people over the past few days to get their reactions, and honestly, people's reactions have been kind of all over the place on this thing. Some people have been totally shocked by everything that they've read in the guide, and some people said that they were not surprised at all by any of it. So that brings us to poll question number 3. When reviewing the reopening guide OSPI released on June 11th, did anything surprise you? So we had our 30-second timer going. We might not need all 30 seconds this time. It's a easy, quick two to answer possibilities here. Okay. All right. And just wrapping up here, let's go ahead and share those results. 50-50. Okay. See what I mean? So if you were one of those folks that was surprised by something, what was it? I'd be curious to know if you want to share your thoughts in the chat box over here. I am keeping, it helps me to learn when you share that information with me. I'm always curious to know what I can learn about how things are communicated. It helps me make my practice better. Just always curious to know, get feedback from folks. Okay, preparing to reopen. This is what I was talking about earlier, where I want us to use each other in the region as a resource for each other. I feel like we could share templates and examples as a region. What are some of those things that we could actually be sharing so that we do not have to reinvent the same materials over and over again? I was thinking maybe building signage, board approved reopening plans as far as like examples go to help each other with generating some ideas. Just in case materials, I was thinking that we might want to have some materials set up. So if someone at our school is diagnosed with a case of COVID-19, how are we going to inform the families? If we need to return to a continuous learning at a distance, toward a sort of hybrid model, or distance learning completely, if we're going to close down schools, how are we going to communicate that? These are the types of things that I feel like we can start collecting into a repository to make sure that we are sort of learning from each other. We're all on the same page. If the more we can prepare for this in advance and we're not under the time pressure, the better and more clear our communication is going to be. So if you could type some answers into the chat box, because I'm going to be collecting these and using it as ideas to sort of help me understand what the need is in our region. So are there things that I can start getting to work on that would be helpful to the region? Please enter them into the chat box and I can start working on it. Oops, yikes. Okay. Okay, so then I have a follow-up question. Again, if you could please give me some feedback in the chat box, that'd be super helpful. What do you think the biggest communications challenge is going to be this fall? I'd be curious to know. It's just to sort of give us a heads up, something that we can prepare for, things that you have anxiety around. We want to know so that we can help prepare to respond to that. And then that brings us to the community engagement and needs assessment portion. So interestingly, one thing that I noticed about the guide that OSPI sent out that stood out for me was their emphasis on family and community engagement. So for example, they suggested that districts needed to partner with community agencies and community-based organizations to determine what assets are available in the community and match those assets with the families who need them. So somehow we have to get point A with point B and connect those people who have assets with people who need them. It also says that districts should place students and family voice at the center of their work to ensure schools are prioritizing what is most important in decision making, and this is huge. So how do you know what works? I want to take this opportunity to introduce Samantha Murray. She's joined us today from Qualtrics. Samantha, do you want to start sharing your slideshow and I'll stop sharing mine, or how do you want to do this?
Hi, Kristen. It would be okay if you would continue to drive. That would be just fine.
Okay.
I hope that would be seamless for everyone.
Okay, should we start off with a poll question? Let's launch with poll question number 4. How do you typically receive feedback from your families and community? And I have given some choices here. Answer all that you are currently using. These were the choices that were suggested by OSPI. And if you are going to answer other, I would just invite you to go ahead and share with us what your other is in the chat box so that we can add to our list of things that might be helpful for connecting with our community. When we end the poll and Samantha gets started, I'm just going to have her give a quick summary of who Qualtrics is, just really quickly. We're using them as they're a new tool for us for community engagement, and so I would just invite her to just give a quick rundown. So let's take a peek at these results here. All right, surveys. 90% of you say you are currently using surveys. Questionnaires, also a big response. And then in the other, so we have phone and email, school personnel. Okay, this is cool. This is great. Keep that information coming in as Samantha gets started. This is all really good information. Oops.
Hey, Kristen, I think if you want to stop your screen, I can share mine. I don't know if we loaded our slides into the master for you.
Good to know. I will stop share.
Okay.
Thanks, Brett.
Yeah, and I was just going to introduce myself. So Brett Callahan with Qualtrics, partner with Samantha Murray and Byron Adams, who are going to be presenting. We've partnered with ESD 113 since last fall, and so really excited to share more with you today. Let me go ahead and share my screen. And just want to confirm everyone can see that okay? All right, got the thumbs up. Just to answer the question of who is Qualtrics, and then we'll turn it over to Samantha, and she can probably provide a more eloquent answer. But essentially, we help districts and ESDs gather perception data and couple that with your operational data. So that takes shape in surveys as its most rudimentary form, but really any type of feedback collection. And you'll see a variety of feedback collections. In addition to just collecting the data, we also do analysis reporting. So that can, you know, in non-COVID terms, that can be everything from climate and culture to professional development, general community engagement. There's probably 80 different use cases across the district, but during COVID, we have quite a bit that, you know, can help folks today. And so when Kristen reached out, what we thought would be beneficial for today is to go really over why engagement matters and some best practices, what Samantha will cover, and then really pause and look at how we can best align to some of the state guidelines that came out. I saw in some of the chat, there's some kind of concern in terms of direction around that. And then one of the asks that Kristen had made of us was, is there something tangible that people can actually walk away with from this session? So we'll walk through some solution sets that are ready to launch for anyone who would benefit from it, and kind of walk through how that would work in your own particular district. And then hopefully we'll have time for Kristen to tell her own story of how they've utilized us in community engagement throughout this period. So I just want to provide some context in terms of what we'll be discussing. But with that, Samantha, I'll turn it over to you.
Thanks, Brett. And thank you all for welcoming me and inviting us to participate in your session today. So as Brett said, and you know, you captured it just fine, Brett, as a way of introduction to the group here, and I know it's a large group, I am a former Baltimore County employee, Baltimore County Public Schools team member from the Department of Research, Accountability, and Assessment, and a former Qualtrics user there. So as Brett described, we used Qualtrics 5+ years ago when I was still in the district to do just that, which was to collect all of that perception data, specifically around stakeholder engagement. And so there's a lot of lessons learned there, but hopefully we can provide some really specific advice and you know, best practices around a lot of the questions that you all are putting into the chat, conversations that you're having within your teams. And we'll talk first about why engagement matters, which we won't be sharing anything new there, but really just making sure that the overview is set. And especially with reopening and the hypersensitivity around making sure that communication is appropriate, is timely, is factual. I saw a couple of folks in the chat indicating that, you know, making sure that as fast as the information comes out, that you can communicate it, that you can kind of maintain that trust, continue to bring your communities together around the central messages that you're trying to convey, but then also make sure that they've understood you correctly and that you're getting their feedback around their confidence, their preferences, parents and students, as well as your staff, faculty, and the community at large. And so just these 4 bullet points here about why engagement matters, that's overall, but I think especially now, the trust piece is going to be critical. So I wanted to just set that stage for everyone. And then if we go forward, Brett, that would be great. So one of the things that I really coached our schools when I was in the county is around continuous feedback. And again, considering the context that we're in, we drove a lot of our performance management and continuous improvement efforts through the use of the platform, where we were collecting feedback from our schools, from our communities. And really it's to drive that action and improvement. And one of the ways that we think about using the data that we would be collecting frequently, instead of just an annual survey, which that is a great piece of data, that's a great data point, but that tells you what happened. And so that's really typically at the end of the year. Our stakeholder survey, for example, was right now we need rapid communication. And so what that allows us to do, and what we support schools in doing, is collecting data more frequently. And when we say collecting data, collecting feedback, understanding how your parents and students and your employee base, I'll say, are feeling. And that will then allow you to have better conversations internally, make changes more quickly, update processes and procedures, and have hopefully richer conversations. And so that you're not wondering what your stakeholders are feeling. And so really it's this idea of asking the right questions, asking them well, and bringing in that data frequently so that you have time to adjust and to make your plannings, I think, more relevant and responsive to your stakeholders. So if we can go to the next one. And so I know a lot of your teams are thinking about a lot of different topics and areas that you will want to collect feedback on. And so those topics can range from your engagement with virtual learning, so our students and our families accessing technology the way that they should be. Do they have access to it? Satisfaction, how is that going? Readiness to return. We're hearing a lot about social emotional learning as well as well-being, staff professional development. And as you all think about other topics that you would want to get your community's feedback on, what are some of those other survey topics that you might be considering? And so that's something that I invite you to put into the chat if you would like, but also just to think about what are some of the topics that you are wanting to ask your community about. And as you're doing that, just to think of at least 3 things when you're thinking about the types of surveys that you would be sending. And so 1, what is their purpose? And so often we want to ask everything in one survey. And that can be overburdensome, and that can take a lot of time. And so as you're thinking about your communication strategy and getting feedback, think about what is the most important thing to know now, and try to prioritize and separate, if you can, the types of surveys that you send out so that you get that feedback, continuous feedback, without overwhelming your families and overwhelming your staff and communities. And then making sure that you have a conversation about how you'd like to use that data. And then as you are collecting it, as you are analyzing it and having internal conversations, returning sort of that feedback to your community to say, I heard you, this is what we understand, and then continuously asking those questions to drive continuous improvement, especially with planning and to reopen. Okay, we can go on to the next slide. And please feel free, if you have questions along the way, to put those into the chat as well. I think these next set of slides will just be a very high level overview of some of the essential tips and tricks that we would typically talk about in terms of writing effective survey questions. Certainly we can go a lot deeper into any one of these topics, but again, we wanted to maximize the time here. If as I go through, you have questions because you know you have a survey that you've either put out or are planning to put out, and you're not quite sure about one of these topics and how it applies to you, we're happy to take those questions to add some value if you have specific concerns around any one of these areas or others that we don't cover. So these topics here, making sure every question is necessary, super important. There are must knows, and then there are nice to knows. There are, you know, essential questions that you need to get out, and then there are others that maybe in terms of prioritization aren't necessary right now. So think of those things as you're planning. The shorter, the better, but also very impactful. You want to make sure that you ask direct questions. Asking one question at a time is really about thinking about your respondent, thinking about your students, your parents, your teachers. If they're on a mobile device, for example, we want to take into consideration what that experience looks like. And so when we ask one question at a time, that is helpful for when someone is taking the survey, so that they're not scrolling incessantly on their phone, but that they can just take a question and move on to the next. More sophisticated sort of ways of thinking about this would be to avoid leading and biased questions. Speaking your respondent's language, that's both literally and figuratively. So obviously if there's a language translation, you want to do that, but also keeping the language very simple. As academics, as those of us in education, we want to make sure that we are actually addressing the reading level. And so generally speaking, when we're sending surveys to adults, we tend to overcomplicate the question. Direct and simple is what the advice is there. So speaking the language, it doesn't have to be formal. It can be, it can almost be, if there's a common jargon that you use, you might want to use that, but definitely don't use things like acronyms that people might not understand. And then we'll talk about these other points too, avoiding grids and matrices if at all possible, rephrasing yes and no questions. That gets into how do you use the data, and then taking your survey for a test drive. And so, you know, we always recommend that you test it internally just to make sure that there are not any kinks with the way that it was built, but also that your intentions are coming across with each of your questions. And so somebody will hopefully say, hey, that question doesn't make sense. And then you have a chance to edit. So we'll run through examples of some of these and get your thoughts and feedback in the chat if you'd like. But in terms of asking direct questions, and so these are non-education questions just to get you guys out of that, the language of education. And so how often are you particularly averse to risky situations? That's a weird way to ask that question. The more direct question is, how often do you take risks? So that's one pass of sort of editing that you can do when you're writing questions. Get the question down, but then think, how can I ask this more directly? So if we go to the next slide, so here's another one. So asking one question at a time. We like to get a lot of information. Here's a question that I see often, and we made this mistake in Baltimore County. It's the question of communication. It's about how strongly do you agree or disagree that communication is timely, relevant, and whatever the third thing is. And we would get that data back and we're like, okay, are they saying that it's timely, that they agree, that it's relevant? And so we couldn't quite parse out and understand exactly what the response was because we asked more than one question. So which cereal do you think is the healthiest and most delicious? Well, what are they responding to there? The healthiest piece of it or the most delicious piece? You want to ask one question at a time. And you could even just say which cereal is your favorite. Or if you're focusing on health and deliciousness, focus on that. Okay. Avoiding leading and biased questions. I think sometimes this is natural in conversation. So again, if we take a quick step back when we're writing questions, this example of Channel 6 News, there is the first leading part of this is actually priming someone to believe or to strongly oppose that Channel 6 News weather forecasting is the most accurate. Just drop that because you want an unbiased or you want to reduce the bias in your responses. So you simply just ask, how often do you feel Channel 6's news weather forecasting is accurate? Don't lead with someone's opinion about whether it is or not. And so as it relates to schools, if you have an interest in understanding how well you're doing with communication, for example, you just simply ask that direct question and not lead it with, you know, we're doing a great job this year, aren't we? How well do you think we're doing? And so we go to the next one, Brett, thank you. This one is combining a couple of different bullet points that I initially shared up front, which is try not to use the yes, no, or the true, false binary. Sometimes that's appropriate, but we would love to help schools understand about using response scales, especially the constructs that you're looking to measure. And so that can get a little fancy and technical, but really it's, what is the thing that you're asking about? Well, your response options should reflect either in your question and then in your response option, or just your response option, the thing that you're interested in measuring. So instead of true or false, the statement golf is a white collar sport, if you're really looking at understanding how someone understands what white collar means or the degree to which it's a white collar sport, you would ask that question. So this is combining the asking a direct question, really focusing on what you're wanting to understand about that question. And then your response options should reflect what you're trying to understand, whether that's the degree to which it's a white collar sport, whether it's a white collar sport. So for example, instead of saying something like, you know, did you have a great experience with your coursework this week? Yes or no. Doesn't really help you much. But your question could be, to what extent was your experience this week with your coursework helpful, instructive, fun? And then your response options would be focused in on those constructs, helpfulness, fun, etc. Okay. Okay, thanks, Brett. Oh, and I just actually combined the last slide and this slide. So this is another example. I apologize for that. But just for sake of having it here on the screen, does the traffic on Highway 49 frustrate you, yes or no? A better question would be to really focus on a specific aspect of the traffic on Highway 49 so that you can get a better understanding of how the respondent is feeling. And so if you apply that to your parents or your students or your faculty, again, it's about getting the best data that you can so that you can make the best decisions and have the best conversations internally to drive action. Okay. So these are some interesting pieces of information that our team put together and wanted to share it here. So in 1 minute, typically a respondent can answer 8 multiple choice questions, 8 rows of a matrix table. That's a caveat because I would never recommend that you would have 8 rows of a matrix table ever, but just to give you a sense for how quickly someone can go through questions. The other piece of that is 2 to 3 text entry questions in about 1 minute. And really what you want to do is, again, all of the tips that we talked about and others are so that you are communicating more clearly to your respondent groups so that they're not taking longer to figure out what you're trying to ask them, and then taking even more time to figure out how they answer that question. And then with text entry questions, of course, those need to be direct, to the point, and not the open-ended question where you say anything else, because anything else will give you everything else. And that's really difficult to analyze. And so we advise text entry questions to follow similar rules to the way you would develop those close-ended questions so that you can get more direct responses. Okay. That's it. I know I just threw a whole bunch of content at you, and there's tons more where that comes from, but hopefully as I was going through that and you were thinking about surveys that you're planning to send out or questionnaires that you're developing, if those are things that you already have familiarity with, if there are sort of more advanced questions that you have for us, please let us know. But if this was the first time you were hearing some of these best practices and have questions on those, happy to field those questions as well. How'd I do, Brett?
I think
I
we did
did.
great. You kept
Okay.
right on your timing, so we appreciate it. And Kristen, I
Excellent.
believe we already ran this poll question, correct? So we can skip forward.
We did, yep. We can head straight into Byron and you if you want to do that.
Sure. Byron, I just want to confirm you're on, sir.
I am. Hello,
All right.
everyone.
I will turn it over to you for this section.
All right. Well, thank you, Samantha and Brett, and thank you, everyone, for joining today. I'm just going to address some of the advisory steps out of the state plan, and we'll just go through some of the key themes and then highlight a few of the areas that align with our topic of engagement and community engagement over this call. So, you know, I think these steps were recommended. They came out from the state last week. At a high level, I would say something that jumped out in the plan is there's going to be a lot of diversity in the responses from districts around the state. And I know that one of the things within the plan that is recommended is no matter which, you know, scheduling option or caveats exist within each district, or whatever you all decide to move forward with, the state is recommending that you all consider all of the key themes here and within the plan in order to move forward. So I'll go into a few of them so you just get a high level overview. And I know you all have discussed this with your colleagues and won't belabor things that you all are already surfacing, but it connects to the next piece of this that we'll address in our presentation, which is just giving you some examples of what this looks like right now within our work and within our partnerships around the country as well. So some of the key themes that came out of the recommendations were, one, leading with social emotional needs. So really understanding that that is a key component of the virtual experience as well as the return experience of students and staff coming up in the fall. And so understanding that and addressing those needs is going to be critical. Also professional development, so being able to develop and train staff to respond in the new environment. There's a lot of things that are going on our staff members' plates that weren't really part of the role before. And as a former teacher, former district admin, definitely have can only imagine for a new staff member or a teacher what this experience is like right now and what it will be like in the fall based on the plan. So that PD piece is also critical. Diagnostic and screeners, as well as safety training orientation. I'm going to kind of go over that a little bit, but it won't connect as well with our engagement piece. So I'll save that for some of the follow-up questions if you all have any. Classroom-wide and school-wide behavior supports, transitions and feedback, I think, are all bucketed as well in this sort of response environment that we're going to address as well. The universal screening and family and student voice with community partners and communication. So Brett, if you could advance to the next slide. I pulled out a few of the overall takeaways. Oh, maybe it didn't make its way in there. It's the key themes piece. Actually, I don't know, maybe I should share my screen if it's not in your deck. Here we go. All right. There we go. Can you all see that? Great. So some of the key themes from the state plan align to engagement. One, leading with SEL, so social emotional learning, and I think in the phrase of the recommendations was really identifying and delivering responsive supports, including mental health check-ins, and that within our work is it can take a lot of different variations. So going to Samantha's point of how you're phrasing questions, how you're sending that out to your staff or your students. There's a lot of options there, but there are some best practices as well in how you get this feedback from your students and staff. The mental health check-in piece is really, there's a lot of variation in what that's looking like around the country, right? So we have partners in districts around the country who are doing regular pulse check-ins, and some of them are as simple as just asking students and staff how they're doing. And that's helping, if you're a staff member and you want to just understand how your kids are doing, and also keep that relationship alive in the virtual environment. Sometimes those touch points are helpful. And also from the administrator perspective, just checking in with your teachers is also a critical component of maintaining that relationship, making that, just extending that branch of support so that there is that consistent touch point. We've seen that sort of basic check-in, as well as things that are getting more complicated, or more complex, not complicated. It's more of a, using prescribed SEL tools and measures that do things like measure teacher-student relationships, measure student-to-student relationships in the virtual environment. And so it takes a lot of different shapes and sizes depending on the preferences of the district and their goals. But this is one of the key components of the return to school plan. And we've just seen this around the country. So it could take a lot of different forms. Family and student voice is another component. I think the biggest one that we've seen so far is just the confidence measurement. I know a couple of districts, at least in the state, are doing work like this where they're trying to measure the confidence to return and what conditions need to be in place in order to have a family send their kid back to school or send their children back to school, given the closures. And those conditions and questions around that have been things like, asking parents what their response is to a proposed plan, for example. So if the plan includes virtual learning and a scheduled in-person component where their students are coming in twice a week, right? So getting the parent feedback and the family feedback has been key for that. And also the student feedback has been critical for helping to inform the construction of those plans, as well as get the buy-in from the community so that that plan is validated and you're able to get feedback where it's needed. The other piece of this that's really important is accessibility, which Samantha touched on, but in the guidelines, one of the things that's stressed is just making sure that these forms are available in versions that are going to be accessible by everyone in your community. So that's thinking about things like translations and access through your outreach, where there may be multiple versions of this going out, whether it's a flyer with a QR code that's leading people to a survey, where you may not have consistent email accounts or phone numbers that will be able to touch 100% of your community. And then reminder emails and cadence to remind your community to participate. So that accessibility piece is something we've seen a lot in our partnerships, and we often help to facilitate within especially this new environment where it's so important to get as many people as possible to drive your feedback and to make sure that you've got a lot of buy-in. And one of the things we've heard a lot about are what level of participation is critical, where should I be focusing my efforts to get that family voice or the student voice. And what we've been seeing a lot of is just to my earlier point of just pursuing all those different channels of email and text and paper where that's available, so that that you are pursuing as many parents and community members as possible. We've also seen people get creative with using sites for food distribution as a way to get out the word for those feedback channels and to make sure that that families are aware. So it could take a lot of different iterations, but really just thinking of what your community needs the most and being creative and having the tools in place to get the materials out there and get the participation is is what we've been advising, what we've seen be really successful. Finally, the key theme from the state guidelines that we've seen aligned to engagement here are feedback in virtual settings. So this is there's a lot of different ways this could look, but the one that jumped out in the guidelines, and we've seen a lot of people thinking about this around the country too, is just how to train teachers to provide students on how they can reflect on and evaluate their own learning. One of the big components of being at home for so long and having this long period of time without in-person instruction that we've heard is a concern over learning loss and what the impact of this could ultimately be on students. And so one of the things as we're getting back into multiple forms of learning delivery, whether it's in-person or hybrid or all virtual, is giving students the opportunity to start to be more in positions of ownership of their learning. So that could be self-grading and providing feedback to themselves. It could be small groups of peers and students working together in work groups and providing each other feedback. And we've also seen that in the form of things like daily questionnaires where students are measuring their own mastery and letting their teacher know how they feel. And their teacher is regularly checking in on that and using that data to help guide their own support of students. So they know, hey, here are the touch points that I need to have based on my student feedback. This group of students is reporting that they've mastered it, so I can focus on my other groups of students who may need more support. Maybe that's setting up of office hours where they're checking in over Zoom, or if you do have the in-person touch points where you're setting up an office hours sort of component. It's all going to look so different because you all will have that insight into ultimately what this will look like in your districts, in your schools. But having that flexible tool in place that can do all of these things in one sort of dashboard and one component is going to be key. And we've just seen that be really successful around the country, even given the immense diversity of approaches and the needs around communities that we've worked with. So I'll pause there. I know that's a lot of information, and we'll hand it over to Brett, who can get into a couple of the specifics of what this looks like for a few of our partners around the country. Thank you all.
Thanks, Byron. Yeah, and I definitely want to encourage, as there are questions that come up, feel free to chat them out. Always interesting when you're presenting to over 100 people and you don't have the ability to see folks' faces and interact on a more personal level. So I promise to stop sliding you too much. I know we've had a lot of slides today, but I'm going to show you 2 or 3 more, and then we're going to jump into a solution set that actually is ready to launch for anyone, because the idea, again, just reiterating when I spoke with Kristen, we were honored to be invited to partner on this, was how do you as participants walk away with something that is of value, that's tangible, that can be implemented now that state guidelines are out. And so again, we feel like it's an immense responsibility given the capability of the technology that we have for districts to share this on a mass scale, because we can really help right now. And we've done that in mass at big levels, both within K-12 and higher education. So again, let me get through 2 or 3 more slides, and then we'll actually jump into some projects in a breakout session. So really, as we looked as a leadership team into how we can help K-12, it's and I know a lot of folks are waiting on state guidelines to come down. It seems like there's mixed reviews of where, especially around transportation, some other elements of where your particular district falls into that scope. But I would say that first element of ask is still right where we're at, but quickly it's going to be into analyze and act, because there's, I've heard this from a lot of our clients where there's almost been this level of forgiveness during this period where we're in unprecedented times. Folks gave us some latitude to figure things out, but I think as of July 1, some of that latitude goes away a little bit, where they expect a plan in place, they expect action to be taken. So one of the things that we came out with as an organization, and I will share this in follow-up with Kristen, because we have several free solutions that anyone can access, and then we have some other solutions that aren't free, but certainly carry their weight throughout the year. We landed originally on this phase of how to immediately react. And if you all can rewind your brains back to March and April, which probably seems like 2 years ago, back to where is this immediate need to just facilitate, okay, how do we gauge folks in terms of accessibility to connectivity, to technology, to meals, social emotional well-being, and then also looking at educators, right? Well, how well trained are they to deliver distance learning content? What is their well-being? What do they need additional training on regarding technology or just general guidelines going forward? And so that was kind of that initial phase we see on this first column. So we have some free solutions, which again, I'd be happy to share out, which are all editable. But where we kind of find ourselves now is this plan to return, or firmly in this plan to return, where we're looking at how ready is our community to get back into a classroom setting and what conditions are in play. It sounds like there's a lot of autonomy in terms of districts being able to make some decisions in terms of how they want to scale back in. I think there's the overwhelming response is we want to return in some capacity, but what does that capacity look like? And so using data to support administrative decisions is huge right now. Not just going off of a hunch, but saying, hey, look, this is what you all said early June. This is what you said late June. This is what you said mid-July. And this is what we're aligning to state guidelines and why we feel confident returning in such and such a fashion. So I will show you a couple projects that are fully baked. I know one thing right now when you're dealing with a pandemic and you're wearing multiple hats already is you don't want to reinvent the wheel. So we have created the wheel for you. We have a couple great projects that are ready to launch called our readiness assessments. So these are meant for guardians and educators first and foremost. And then if you ever wanted to take it a step further, we do have the technology to do full-blown symptom tracking. So I know we've been working with a lot of higher education universities because they're bringing back athletes early and trying to prep in group athletics and noticing COVID cases spiking as they're getting those athletes together. So the thought is, okay, we can't do this on a manual basis, and that's just with a few hundred athletes. How are we going to do this on a mass scale when we have 30,000 kids returning, or in some of your cases, 2,000 kids returning or 5,000 kids returning? So that ability to do symptom tracking and then automate a lot of processes. The idea is to save you all time and use data to support really tough decisions you have to make over the next couple of months. And also thinking about not just a direct survey. Someone had mentioned it in the chat, but looking at all the different distribution methods we can use and being tactical in that. Certainly you can email out surveys, but you can have anonymous links on your website. You can text it. You can use QR codes. You also can just use your main website as a general feedback collection opportunity, and I'll show you what that looks like. That's another free solution set that we have for you all to share. And then just thinking of ongoing, always on kind of feedback channels. So, and then as we pivot out of COVID, thinking of, okay, where else do we have continuous need to collect perception data? And so I use Bellingham, north of you all in the state, but as a prime example of someone who initially got us for a general climate and culture project, and now a couple years into the license are really using us to facilitate how they do any type of feedback collection and distribution across their district, across multiple departments and multiple projects. So I've probably shared enough within the slide. So what I'd like to show you real quick are, again, these pre-baked readiness assessments that, again, we can launch for you very quickly. So we're working with Vancouver Public Schools, so we have their logo, but all this is entirely customizable. So you can have your own logo, your own backdrop. And as you can see, it's all mobile enabled. So if, I think as Kristen said in the opening, most of her emails she gets on her cell phone, she responds. There seems to be a higher response rate being able to have that mobile capacity. But this is meant to be a guardian assessment. And so when you look at us returning, you're asking, okay, with cautionary measures in place, will you be sending your children to school on such and such start date? So if I say, yes, I plan to, but I do have concerns. Okay, what concerns do you have right now about your child returning? I would assume a lot of folks are concerned with catching corona or it spreading, the ability or inability to social distance in school set. And then someone mentioned appropriate daycare. That's obviously a real issue right now in terms of how we facilitate daycare. How important do you think it is to get information? So I won't go through each and every one of these in too much detail, but it's asking things like if distance learning is still required, how has distance learning gone in the last couple months? So if we found out that they're a little disappointed with the level of instruction, we can gather further information. And then I know a difficult decision, whether this is in scheduling or transportation, is looking at people's availability, right? So when we're looking at what days may be most applicable, so let's say Monday, Wednesday, Friday may work best for my family. And the time slot that would work best would be the morning shift. As you collect that information, again, you can go ahead and make more comfortable decisions going forward in terms of responding to your guardians, and what would make you feel more comfortable at returning your kids to school. So if I knew that we had daily individual health checks, that there was the ability to be contacted if someone did get sick, or that guidance from local providers going forward, and then just finally asking if they're comfortable with a daily symptom health check. So let's say that I'm not in this scenario. So that's from the guardian perspective. And then from the educator perspective, very similar. But we're asking general questions. How supported do you feel by the school? Let's say if you have concerns. It's going to run through relatively same project, but what would make you feel comfortable in returning? So I won't go through all those. Everyone can look at the questions. I've actually shared them with Kristen, and she has them in the Google Doc that's a shared folder. But just taking this a step further, as an administrator, where maybe you don't have a whole lot of time to look at this, one of the elements that could be helpful is just the ability to take a snapshot. If I want to look at a particular school site, or break it down by grade level and look at all the responses to what my confidence is for my stakeholders to return. Let's say that we did engage with folks and our student and families, about 80% of them felt comfortable, but our faculty is at 60%. And again, this is in mid-June. We can reconnect with them in about 20 to 30 days to see what that growth trajectory is based off of changes we've made as an administration going forward. And then I wanted to show, I mentioned the always on feedback channel. So not just looking at direct survey, but also looking at the ability to embed something on a website, because obviously that's where a lot of people land just to look for general information. So this is another way in which we can share information, we can gather information and have that routed appropriately. So let's say, for example, that someone reports, you had something about wanting to schedule a visit with, a school counselor. You can actually route that appropriately to the specific school counselor instead of having this just sit unattended to. But all kinds of general, just always on feedback channel nature. And then if folks wanted to, a lot of websites are going to have like an FAQ. And I wanted to guide them to maybe what state guidance FAQs are. I can have more strategic pop-ups really aligning to what coronavirus resources they have in the community. So again, just the ability to constantly communicate with your community members, whether those are internal or with your guardians or students going forward. So those were a couple projects that we had pre-baked. I will show you real quick a landing page if anyone was interested in looking at some of the free resources as well. So we've come out with about 20 free resources regarding COVID. So for example, I know a lot of folks within ESD 101 have launched this Return to Work Pulse. Doesn't ask for payment information, just something you guys can sign up for free if you want some guidance in terms of engaging with your educators or your staff going forward. So though I will pause there real quick, see if there are any initial questions, and then if not, we can go into the breakout session. But was there any questions on the chat that we could address? Kristen, anything you want me to cover that we didn't in that initial section?
I don't think so.
Okay. So in regards to a breakout, we did share with Kristen some of the questions. I exported them into a Word document, and realizing that, the guidelines that we came across and that we developed nationwide may not necessarily fit your specific need. So expanding upon those, so we thought that a solid breakout may be looking at, okay, what additional questions would you want to ask for your specific district to take shape of how do we engage with folks immediately? what kind of distribution methods. Again, I mentioned things like using social media, sending that out via email, having it on a website, etc. And then the frequency as well. I think some of the power in this is doing quick surveys. I know Samantha mentioned you can most people can field up to 8 questions in less than a minute. Doing that on a regular cadence so that you have something to look at longitudinal over time, so that you can make effective decisions. So Chris, I don't know if there's any more guidance on the breakout or if that is appropriate.
Yeah, did you want to share the screen that I had set up for the breakout session?
Sure.
Okay, so when you go into your breakouts, this breakout's going to be much shorter. We're going to do 15 minutes together in small groups. If you're in a district and you don't have a team with you today and it's just you by yourself, what we're trying to do is to group similar sized districts together, those people who are in singles, so that you don't have to do this work by yourself. It's a lot more effective and more fun when you can collaborate with partners. So don't worry if you are a single person, we will find someone for you. So these are the questions that I thought would be helpful for us to work on when we depart from each other for like 15 minutes. What platforms or tools will you use to receive the feedback and input to help you with decision making? Do you think you need to add any new tools? I mean, with this emphasis on family and community engagement, this is an opportunity to do sort of a look around your district to figure out what tools you're currently using. Are they adequate? Do you need to be adding new ones, and what might those be? And then, like Brett said, what kinds of questions do you want to ask and how often do you need to ask them? We've been surveying our employees once a week for like the past 3 months when COVID-19 hit. And I do have some slides to share about how that's been going for us as an ESD. I don't think we're going to have time to get to them today, but you can look in the PowerPoint that I've shared on the Google Drive to see some of the results that we've been getting over time. So I would love for you, when we break out, to pick someone who's going to record for you and then share a quick summary in the chat box when we get back. Shiloh, can we go ahead and get people into their groups?
Absolutely. Just a reminder, turn on your video while you're in these groups. It can make it a better experience for everyone. And if you end up going to a breakout room and nobody ends up joining you for the first few minutes, come on back and we will find you a new breakout room. Off you go.
Sorry, muted. Welcome back. Hope you guys had a good opportunity to work with each other and brainstorm ideas on how to connect with your community. If you would just take a few moments to enter into the chat box if you were one of the ones nominated to summarize what your group chatted about. I'd be happy to learn more about that. So I'm just going to briefly touch on the pulse surveys that we have done at ESD 113 since COVID-19 hit. So we've been doing quick 2 to 3 questions staff surveys. We're calling them snapshots because they are just a snapshot of time. And we have been doing it for a variety of reasons, and I've written down 4 to talk about today. Number 1, it communicates to our staff that we care about what they think. It's a way for leadership to connect on a weekly basis, and we want people to feel like they are remaining connected to their work and to their colleagues. It also helps to communicate what is on top of mind for leadership. The past few weeks, we have shifted away from the telework and COVID-19 to racial justice based upon what's been happening in the news. We want to let them know that they have a role to play at the ESD in the pursuit of racial equity through the work that they do. And we want to make sure that we are communicating that with them. And by asking them questions in the survey, hopefully they're understanding that they do have a role to play in that. We've asked questions, a lot of questions, and they've been pretty simple, but we've learned a lot. The survey is optional. Not everybody fills it out every week. It's totally up to them if they feel like doing it or not. But if the people do take the time to share their feelings, the leadership really does spend quite a bit of time reading the feedback that they get to better understand the mood of the agency and to better understand what we need to spend time prioritizing and talking about. We do share the results with the staff each week so they can see what their colleagues shared and to also hold leadership accountable for acting on that information. So I'm just going to show you an example of the kind of information that we get when we when we receive the feedback. So this is what we've been tracking over time. You'll see we do ask this consistent question from week to week. How have you been feeling, either personally or professionally, over the past week? And you can see how those emotions have sort of ebbed and flowed over the weeks. I do want to just indicate, if people feel like they're drowning, we do have, it does trigger in our survey a pop-up window that shows people how to find information to help. And also we give them an opportunity to share with us their name and email if they want follow-up contact from a member of the leadership team. We don't usually get folks picking that category, but we do get 1 or 2 per week. So we want to make sure that we are not just leaving them out there and saying, thanks for participating. We want them to know that we'll take action on it if you want us to. And then here is one of our more recent surveys. And so this is our week, how have you been feeling? And this is the breakdown for people feeling on top of things, a bit stressed, treading water, or drowning. We did get 2 folks a couple weeks ago who felt like they were drowning. And you'll notice that we have a bar chart here that, interestingly, depending on what's happening in the news or with COVID-19, or this one specifically is around the recent news about the racial justice, people have been, different categories get different responses every week. So it evolves all the time. And this, let's see, this one was the survey that we did the week after the racial justice or the racial protests hit the national news. So people were feeling really lamenting about the condition of the world at large. So that one got a huge increase that week. That one's normally a fairly small response rate. You'll also notice that the work overload is farther down the list of concerns. Reflected in the open text responses that we got, they are feeling like they're adjusting to their new rhythm of work. And so interesting that it reflects that way in the survey as well. So does anybody have any questions about our snapshot survey? I'd be curious to know if you have any questions about that, and you could put them in the chat box. If I can figure out how to open that. There we go. Let's see. Okay, so folks are using surveys and are interested in surveys. That's good. I found it extremely helpful, and if you keep them pretty short, you're more likely to get a higher response rate, I've found. People don't usually mind answering a couple questions. We've gotten really, really good reactions. I mean, some people are kind of tired of filling them out. I mean, you can have survey fatigue, obviously, but other people have expressed just how much they appreciate having a platform for sharing their thoughts, because we are working from a distance. We don't have that personal connection anymore. We've really used the survey and the results from the survey to understand better how we need to be more intentional with the communication that we're putting out. And we have gotten really great feedback from staff on how much they appreciate the intentional focus that we've had on communications during these past 3 months. We've really been working overtime on making sure people feel connected and going out of our way to make sure those connections are happening as much as we can. So let's see, what do you do with a snapshot info? How do you address it? Okay, so when we get feedback, every week is pretty much a different theme. So we will take an approach about, so we'll ask questions like, how do you feel like communications is going during COVID-19? Is there some way we can support you? So we ask open-ended questions through our Qualtrics survey. We're able to take open-ended questions and then filter them into the categories. And if we see feedback that indicates that they need help with something, then that helps us to understand how we need to engage with them. So 1 week we did have one person who indicated that they were drowning and they wanted to have contact from leadership. So we followed up with contact. If we hear that people are having trouble with technology and getting connected, or they don't have the hardware that they need, we make sure that they're getting those resources that they need. One specific way that I will say that we have used the feedback is that it helps for Dana to understand, he's our superintendent, it helps Dana to understand what the emotions are in the agency. He sends out a personal letter to the group every week to acknowledge the feelings that we've been noticing and to talk about how we can work as an agency to address those needs. He wants to give a message of hope, and he wants to stay in touch with the actual feelings of the agency so that they stay relevant. Sometimes it's hard for leadership to have contact with that frontline staff just generally. If you take everybody out of the office and everybody's working remotely, it makes it even harder. So having that, the questions that we ask every week, I think really helps to connect actual words and in a way that we wouldn't otherwise have the opportunity to do. Okay, let's see. So I just wanted to sort of go over what we had talked about today. We started talking about communication strategy and some best practices for how to do that. And then I provided a toolkit along with, so I'm going to call it the whole thing as a toolkit posted online in the Google Drive. We're giving you access to the PowerPoint as well as the communications template that you can start filling out, as well as the tactics tracker so that you can track your efforts over time and assign people those tasks and to make sure that they get done. It helps with accountability if you spell out specifically who's going to do what when. And so we have also gone through OSPI's reopening guide and talked about how we can engage community and family feedback that is going to be so important as we start that work that's listed in the guide. And then we shared one example of a tool that has been helpful for us when we're doing our work to try to stay engaged with the people we work with. And then I will also just say, and I think Byron brought this up, that we need to be inclusive when we are communicating. When you get when you're working really fast and under a lot of pressure, it can be easy to forget this. So slow down and remember that we need to be inclusive, translate your communications into languages other than English. If you need resources for that, we have contact names for folks who can do translations into other languages. Make sure that everything you put out digitally is accessible so that everyone has access, including people with disabilities. If you need help with ADA accessibility, again, the communications team at ESD 113 has those skills to be able to do that fairly quickly. And then just check your communications for bias and ensure they don't perpetuate stereotypes. So that's it. Does anybody have questions that we need to address before we wrap up here? Any parting questions or thoughts or concerns? I mean, did I say something that you were thinking you're insane? Let me follow up on that and question your thinking. I'm always happy for feedback.
I might have one. Is there sample questions out there to get parents' insights on reopening? That's what we're working on right now. We have our reopening committee meeting, second one tomorrow. We're hoping to finalize a survey for our parents about reopening in the fall, what their thoughts are. Is there any sample questions out there anywhere?
Brett, I'm going to let you take
that.
that.
A district could share.
Yeah, I mean, I shared some of the questions that we have in our readiness assessment with the group prior to the breakout. So those are some vetted questions that do adhere to CDC guidelines. Those were also worked in conjunction with Los Angeles County Office of Ed. So, I mean, it's something we work across 80 districts to really define those question types. There's another tool set. There's an organization called the New Teacher Project, and they shared a whole bank of survey items that I'd be happy to share with Kristen, and she could pass that along to you guys as well.
Thank you.
Okay, I just also want to remind you that we will be posting this recording along with the rest of the sessions in the 6-part series. We're going to be posting them as they become available on esd113.org/reopening. So if you wanted to relive your experience here or share it with a colleague, they will be available. And then I just wanted to thank you for joining me today, and thank our friends from Qualtrics for joining us as well and sharing their knowledge. If you want more information, I'm here. This is my email and phone number. This is my cell phone because I am working remotely. Feel free to reach out and ask any questions. Feedback is always good too. I'm always happy to learn. And I feel like we all have a lot to learn, right? We can all get better all the time. So feel free to reach out to me. I'm always happy to help if you have additional ideas or questions. So, okay, thanks for joining me.